Okay, so now let's move on to section 8 of chapter 3. And the only thing I really want you to focus on here is the general difference between cilia, flagella, and microvilli. You don't need to worry about the power stroke or the recovery stroke or even the doublet making up the microtubule pattern, which is called a 9+2. That's too much information. So when we talk about extensions from the cell, we can either have them be described as being cilia or flagella. If we're talking about cilia, their function is to move a substance across the surface of the cell, typically in one direction. If we're talking about flagella, we're talking about movement of the entire cell. So when we hit the central nervous system, you'll come across something called an ependymal cell that has cilia protruding from its surface. And the purpose of the cilia is to move cerebral spinal fluid and circulate it throughout the dorsal cavity within the meninges or the layers of the brain. As for humans, when we're talking about human anatomy and physiology, we only have one type of cell that actually has a flagella that's used to move the entire cell itself, and that would be a gamete. So a sperm cell does have a flagella on it. Again, don't worry about cilia motion as far as the power stroke or recovery stroke goes. Microvilli is a little bit different. A lot of times this gets confused with cilia that protrude from the cell surface, but the function is what's different and distinguishable between cilia and microvilli. So again, if we're talking about cilia, we're talking about moving some sort of substance across the surface, typically in one direction. When we're talking about microvilli, their function is to increase the surface area, because the larger the surface area you have, the more reactions can occur along that surface. So they can increase the surface area for absorption as well as for chemical reactions to take place.